There were 5 of us when we started. 5 drivers, hired for the overnight shift at Larkspur Eats, a backwater food delivery service that barely functioned during the day, let alone after dark. The ad said midnight routes available, $200, 0 cents plus per night. Must have reliable vehicle and open mind. I should have known right then something was off, but I was broke, my student loans were in default, and my checking account was so low the app gave me anxiety every time I opened it. So I emailed. Got a reply an hour later. No interview, just a list of instructions. Report to Lot 5 behind Fairhaven Mall, midnight. Ask for George. Lot 5 was practically abandoned, just a cracked stretch of pavement behind the old JCPenney. George was waiting beside a dented maroon food truck with the paint peeling off in strips. He looked more like a preacher than a manager. Gray suit, slick back hair, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You knew?" he asked. "Yeah." "Nate." He gave a slow nod and handed me a cooler bag. It felt heavier than it should have. "You'll be on Route 9, 1 drop at a time. Don't skip ahead. GPS won't help you out there, so follow the instructions." He gave me a printed route list with 5 addresses. I glanced at the first one. No street name, just house at the bend past Hollow Creek. Beneath the route, printed in bold red ink, were 3 simple rules. Larkspur Eats midnight shift rules. Failure to comply results in immediate termination. If the porch light flickers, do not knock. Leave the food and walk away. If the house has no windows, do not make the delivery. Return the food immediately. If you receive a tip in blood-stained cash, accept it. Do not count it. That was it. No contract, no training video, just George smiling and handing me an old Garmin GPS with a cracked screen. "Oh," he said before I got in my car. "You'll hear things. Ignore them. The food always gets where it's meant to go." The first delivery was the easiest. The house at the bend past Hollow Creek looked normal enough. Paint peeling, porch sagging a little, but definitely lived in. Porch light was steady, windows were intact. I knocked once, handed over a tightly sealed paper bag to a man who looked like he hadn't slept since Reagan was president, and got a $10 0-cent tip in wrinkled bills. He didn't speak, just nodded. Second house was different. It sat at the end of a narrow gravel path. There was no mailbox or address. The place looked like it had been there long before any road reached it. There was no porch light and there was no sound. And no windows. I remembered the rule. If the house has no windows, do not make the delivery. I kept the bag. Drove back the way I came. I swear, I only took my eyes off the mirror for a second, but when I glanced up again, there was someone standing on the gravel road behind me. Tall, pale. They didn't move, just stood there, watching my car fade into the night. When I got back to the truck between stops, George didn't say anything. He just took the unopened bag, checked the seal, and nodded once. "You followed the rule. Good." I almost asked him what was in the bag. I didn't. He handed me the next order. "Don't lose focus on the third stop. They try harder there." I wasn't sure what he meant, but I was already starting to regret the job. The money didn't feel worth it anymore. Still, I drove. The third house was newer, split-level, 2-tone siding. Looked like someone had built it from a Home Depot catalog and then abandoned it before the welcome mat arrived. Porch light flickered the second I turned down the drive. On, off, on, off. I pulled the car into park, unbuckled my seatbelt, then remembered Rule 1. If the porch light flickers, do not knock. Leave the food and walk away. I placed the bag gently on the edge of the porch, didn't step onto the boards, and didn't look inside. As I turned to go, I heard it. A voice. Low, familiar. "Nate?" I stopped mid-step. "Nate, wait. You forgot your phone." My phone was in my pocket. I checked, just to be sure. Still there. The voice tried again, a little closer now. "Nate, it's me." It sounded like my dad. but my dad died 2 years ago. I didn't run. I just walked quickly to my car, got inside, locked the doors, and drove. The rearview mirror stayed dark until I hit the main road again. When I returned to the truck, George didn't smile this time. He just asked, "Did you look?" I shook my head. "Did you speak?" "No." "Good. One more." The fourth stop was the worst. Houses deep in the woods, down a trail I wouldn't have found without the GPS. The bag was unusually heavy this time, like it held something more than food. The woman who answered was older, probably in her 70s, face pale and stiff like wax, eyes glassy. She smiled too wide and handed me a stack of $5.00 bills, all soaked through and reddish brown. Blood-stained. Rule 3 came to mind. "Accept it. Do not count it." I nodded, took the money, backed away slowly. Before I turned to leave, she leaned close to my ear and whispered, "Tell George I remember what he did, and so does the boy." I didn't respond, just got back in the car and drove fast. When I returned, George was already loading another cooler bag into the truck. 4 deliveries, 1 more to go. Before I could speak, he raised a hand. "You did well." I tried to hand him the blood money. He didn't take it. "It's yours. Part of the pay. That last house?" I said, "You did well. Last stop's the important one." He handed me a new slip of paper, but this time there was no address. Just 5 words scrawled in red ink. "Your house. Don't ring the bell." The second I read those words, "Your house. Don't ring the bell," my stomach turned. I thought maybe it was a sick joke, some initiation hazing from the weirdest food delivery job on earth. But the way George looked at me, calm, serious, almost apologetic, I knew it wasn't a joke. "You expect me to bring a delivery to my own house?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Just looked out past the parking lot, toward the tree line. It was quiet, still, like the air itself was holding its breath. "I know how it sounds," he said finally, "but you've followed the rules. This is the last one." "What the hell is in the bag?" He handed it to me. Cooler bag again, but this one was smaller than the others. Lighter. No label, no name. "I thought you said we only deliver food." "We do," George said. "Just not always the kind that goes in a takeout container." That was all he gave me. No explanation, no warning, just that same cold stare and those 5 words etched in my brain like a brand. "Your house. Don't ring the bell." I live 15 minutes from the mall. Back roads, no traffic. One long stretch of cornfields and old windbreaks, and then the split-level rental I've shared with my roommate Miles for the past year. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was already on, not flickering. Steady. Warm. Comforting. That was worse somehow. The bag in the passenger seat buzzed faintly, like something inside was vibrating. I didn't like that. I didn't like any of it. And yet, I got out, walked up the steps, bag in hand, and then I saw it. The door was already cracked open, just an inch or 2, enough to show the chain was still on, enough for me to hear the faint hum of the fridge and a voice inside. My voice. "Hey man, I grabbed you a soda. It's on the counter." That wasn't a recording. It was me. But I hadn't been home all night. I stood frozen, bag clutched to my chest like it might protect me. Inside the house I could hear footsteps. Light. Barefoot. Then, laughter. Mine again. It wasn't loud or forced, just casual, familiar, like I was in there making dinner after work. I should have walked away, should have called someone, but George's warning echoed in my skull like a heartbeat. Don't ring the bell. So I didn't. I set the bag down on the welcome mat, and I waited. The door didn't open further. No one took the bag, but the voice inside, my voice, kept talking. Little things, like it was having a phone call I couldn't hear the other side of. Yeah, it was a weird shift. Got back a little late. No, Miles was asleep already. Same weird dreams again. The one with the woods. My blood ran cold. I hadn't told anyone about those dreams, not even Miles. And there was this guy, George. I stepped back. My foot hit a loose plank on the porch and loudly cracked. Instantly, the voice inside went silent. Then footsteps, coming straight to the door. I turned and bolted down the steps just as the chain unlatched and the door creaked wider. I didn't look back. When I returned to the lot behind Fairhaven Mall, George was gone. The food truck was also empty. The lot was empty, except for a small folded piece of paper wedged under my windshield wiper. And folded it with shaking fingers. Just 2 lines, handwritten in that same red ink. Delivery completed, welcome to Route 9. We'll call you when the next shift starts. I didn't sleep that day. I sat on the couch, staring at the front door, watching the porch light. It never flickered. But around 4 p.m., my roommate came home, tossed his keys in the bowl, looked at me, confused. Hey, he said, didn't you have a shift last night? I nodded slowly. He paused, eyes narrowing. You must have gotten home early. I swear I heard you talking in the kitchen around 1. My mouth went dry. I hadn't gotten home until after 2. You were asleep? I asked. Yeah, out cold. Why? I didn't answer. That night, I unplugged the doorbell, just in case. But around midnight, something brushed the doorknob. I heard it twist, just once, soft and slow, testing. I stayed still in bed, barely breathing. No knock, no bell, just a soft thud, like someone leaving a bag. I didn't touch the bag. Whatever had been left on my porch that night, whatever had twisted the knob, stepped away without a sound. It was still out there, or worse, it had come in. The sun was just creeping over the cornfields when I finally dared to open the front door. The air was thick, stagnant, too still for a spring morning. The bag sat neatly on the mat, the same insulated black nylon with that smooth zipper and stitched red thread. But this time, there was something off. The seams bulged a little, like the contents were breathing. I stared at it for maybe a full minute before I kicked it off the porch with the toe of my boot. It didn't bounce. It thudded, heavy, solid. And I swear to God, something inside shifted. I left it in the ditch and drove 2 towns over to throw my phone in a river. I bought a burner. No more GPS. No more calls. But Route 9 found me anyway. It started again 3 nights later. The ringing. Not my doorbell. I'd unplugged that. This came from somewhere deeper, like it was inside the walls. My new phone buzzed just once. An unknown number, no name. I picked it up. A low, static, heavy voice whispered, "Delivery incoming." That was it. Click. Then, silence, except for the slow squeal of tires outside. I pulled the curtain aside just enough to peek through. It was the truck. Not a van, not an Uber Eats car. The truck. That dented old food wagon with the steam vents and faded Route 9 emblem. And standing at the edge of the yard, arms folded across his chest, was George. I opened the door a crack. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just said, "You've got a double tonight." I quit, I told him. "You can't. I didn't sign anything. You did the first drop-off. That's consent." I felt like the world shifted slightly, like gravity tilted, a cold pressure built behind my eyes. "You can't make me," I muttered. George just nodded at the truck. The window opened. A child's hand reached out, pale, long-fingered, waving slowly. My stomach dropped. "That's not mine," I said. "I don't have a kid. Are you sure?" I blinked, and the hand was gone. The first delivery that night was on Hickory Lane, a gravel road that didn't show up on any maps. The mailbox had no number, just a smiley face sticker peeling at the edges. The porch light flickered. I left the food and walked. Rule 1. Back in the truck, George handed me the second bag. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. I already knew. This one was going to the house with no windows. The second place was worse. It looked like someone had started building a house and then stopped halfway through. 4 crooked walls, no lights, no driveway, just an open door yawning in the middle, like a mouth missing its tongue. I stepped out into ankle-deep fog. Rule 2, if the house has no windows, don't make the delivery. I held the bag tight. I didn't want to go forward, but I didn't want to turn around either. Something behind me, maybe the truck, maybe George, was humming. I took a single step toward the threshold. Inside, it was blacker than night, a darkness so thick it felt like it looked back. I set the bag on the stoop. As I turned to leave, a voice whispered directly into my ear. Finally! I ran. Back in the truck, George was scribbling something in a small black logbook. I leaned against the side of the vehicle, heart racing. Who lives in that house? I demanded. He looked up, pen paused mid-stroke. No one, he said. Not anymore. Then who takes the food? He just shook his head. Some houses aren't homes, some are mouths. That night, back in my bed, I dreamt of doors. Endless hallways lined with them. Each door had a number and a name etched below it. Some were mine, some weren't. One door stood open at the very end. Inside it, I saw myself, back turned, holding a food bag, standing in front of a mirror that didn't reflect me, only the thing waiting behind me. I woke up at 3:13. There was blood-stained cash on my kitchen table. Crisp bills, soaked at the edges, drying into the wood grain. I hadn't brought it in. I never even touched the tip. Rule 3. You may receive a tip in blood-stained cash. Accept it, do not count it. But someone had. Someone knew I hadn't followed the rule. The next night, I didn't sleep, didn't shower, barely breathed. Left the blood-stained money on the table, didn't count it, didn't touch it again. But that didn't matter. By dusk, my burner phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize, a local area code but all zeros. It didn't ring. It didn't vibrate. It glowed. I answered. There was no voice this time, just the same humming static I'd heard when I stood outside that windowless house. Beneath it, something moved. Wet fabric against linoleum, bone-scraping tile, and a voice that wasn't a voice. Final route, one address, come alone. Click. And just like that, my kitchen light went out. When I looked out the window, the truck was already idling in the driveway. Its headlights weren't on, but the grill steamed like it had driven straight through a thunderstorm. George wasn't behind the wheel. No one was. The driver's side door swung open on its own. I don't remember climbing inside. Only the silence. Only the faint scent of scorched milk and stale grease. The bag in the passenger seat was heavier than any of the others. Dense. Warm. I didn't want to touch it. But I did. The final address wasn't on a map. It wasn't in the county. It wasn't anywhere. The road bent in directions that didn't match the landscape. Trees leaned in like listeners. The truck moved on its own. I swear I wasn't pressing the gas. After a while, the road narrowed to a dirt path. The sky above was wrong starless and shifting, like the clouds were made of something thicker than vapor. Something alive. I stopped when I saw the house. It was familiar. Not in a deja vu way. I mean, I knew it. That was my childhood home, except it had burned down when I was 9. My father fell asleep with a cigarette. My mom never made it out. I'd told the story 100 times. But there it was, fully intact. The porch light flickered. The wind smelled like burnt wood and sugar. I stepped out of the truck, bag in hand. My feet crunched on glass that hadn't been there a moment ago. Broken picture frames, bits of china, even a snow globe I remembered smashing as a kid. As I got closer, I saw a figure standing in the doorway. A woman. Backlit, shoulders hunched, holding something that swayed slightly. I stopped halfway up the steps. "Mom?" She didn't respond, just turned slowly, vanishing into the dark. I should have left then, should have run, should have torn the keys from the ignition and driven until the pavement ran out. But the rules don't let you quit. I entered. The inside of the house wasn't right. I remembered each room as one, but the scale was wrong. The hallway stretched longer than it had any right to. The living room slanted downhill. The fridge buzzed in Morse code. My feet moved without my permission. The bag grew heavier with each step. I heard music upstairs, a slow, off-key box tune that echoed down the hallway. And a small voice said, "You're late." I turned and saw the boy, the same boy from the truck window. Pale, big eyes, too big. He didn't blink. He opened his hand, waiting for the food. I looked down, and the bag was open. Inside wasn't food. It was a mask, my face, peeling, waxen, mouth frozen mid-scream. I dropped the bag. It didn't fall. It sank, disappearing into the floor like it had never been there. The boy looked disappointed. "Wrong order," he said. The walls began to breathe. I ran, back through the warped house, through childhood bedrooms that melted into hospital rooms, through a kitchen that blinked like a dying eye. My mother's face appeared on the wall for a split second, smiling, then frowning, then crumbling to ash. I threw open the front door. George was waiting on the porch, arms crossed. "You forgot the tip," he said. My fingers were bleeding. My phone was buzzing in my pocket, every contact I'd ever had lighting up and vanishing one by one. George reached into his coat and pulled out a slip of paper. It was the next delivery. I never made it back to the truck. Somewhere on that porch I fell, or I slipped, or something pulled me. Because when I woke up, I was already sitting behind the wheel again, engine humming, headlights cutting through black fog. There was a new bag in the seat next to me. Its tag read, "You." I'm still out here, driving, making deliveries. Some of the houses that exist, most don't, but they all answer the door. And I follow the rules now. Every time. Because once you've accepted a Route 9 shift, you don't stop. Not until you've delivered to yourself. And by then, it's already too late.